In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Hey everybody, good morning, and we appreciate you for joining us at the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair. We're doing our show a little bit remote and a little bit different of what we normally do. Join us in segment 2 and segment 3 will be U.S. House Representative Dusty Johnson will be joining us as one of our congressmen from the great state of South Dakota to talk a little bit about the history of South Dakota and agriculture in South Dakota. When we started the Legacy of Agriculture program clear back last summer, we decided that we not only would we discuss historical events and historical stories, but as a formative, important part of the future of agriculture, not only just here in the great state of South Dakota, but throughout our entire country, we have to have a good foundation of agriculturalists today, taking us into the future. And so Dusty Johnson is going to be a great representative of the state of South Dakota with what he's doing with the farm bills and some of the events that are going on that's foundational here in the great state of South Dakota. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the first segment as we're waiting for Congressman Johnson to come on. I want to talk a little bit about agriculture and agricultural statistics here in the great state of South Dakota that I'm awfully proud of. Now, most of these statistics are going to be about a year old, give or take, but the averages and the numbers don't change very much from year to year. But I'd like to share with you some interesting agricultural statistics and how the state of South Dakota ranks in U.S. agriculture. Here's a report that was put out by the USDA, the nass.usda.gov, if you want to go on to the website and look at some of the statistics that's out there and how South Dakota ranks with the rest of the country. And I'm going to go over some of those statistics here with you while we're waiting for Dusty Johnson to join us. In the great state of South Dakota, in bison production, meaning the number of bison that are in the state of South Dakota, they're number one in the nation with just over 30,000 head of bison. It's 16.3% of the total bison population in the United States. South Dakota ranks number 2 in sunflower production, with producing just a little over almost 1.1 million pounds of sunflower, which is 38.5% of the total production of sunflowers in the United States. Non-oil production, when it comes to sunflower, 73 million pounds of oil is produced, and sunflower oil production in the year 2022 was just over 1 billion pounds of oil production, sunflower oil production, which is 93, almost 40% of the total percentage of the oil that's produced in the state or in the United States. Those are some pretty great numbers. I'm going to go back. I gave you the wrong number. I read it wrong. But sunflowers, there's over 1 billion pounds of sunflowers that are produced here in the great state of South Dakota. South Dakota ranks number 3 in millet production, oat production, and sorghum for grain production. These are all 2022 statistics. They rank number 4 in the nation in alfalfa production, safflower production, and spring wheat, which was a very interesting statistic to me, that we're number 4 in the nation, producing 7% of the total amount of spring wheat. We're number 5 in all beef cows. We're number 5 in calves. We're number 5 in the nation in lambs. And another interesting statistic is we're number 5 in the nation in farms in land production. So the state of South Dakota in production for land is over 43.2 million acres, ranking almost 5% of the total U.S. Farm acres. Peas, sorghum, and wool is South Dakota is number 5 as well. Corn for grain and corn for silage in 2022, we ranked number 6, as well as hay, honey, sheep, and lambs production in the total amount produced in the United States. So those are some pretty interesting numbers that we're talking about, and pretty proud of those numbers. We live in a large state, and agriculture is our bread and butter here in the United States. But I also have another interesting statistic that I want to talk just a little bit about that I didn't know was available. But according to the USDA, South Dakota computer and internet usage on the farms, and this was a report that was produced on August 17th of 2023. According to the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, 82% of South Dakota farms have access to computers in 2023. This compares to the national average of only 69%. In South Dakota, 93% of farms in South Dakota had internet access, up 3% from the last time that the data was collected in 2021. So this is a very, very interesting statistic. And being in the auction industry and in the auction business, that tells me that in the United States, that 31% of the farms do not have access to computers, meaning that at 3 out of 10 farmers on online only auctions cannot bid and buy at public auction because they do not have access to computers. Now, having said that, the online auction platform has grown substantially over the last 15 years, but still there's a number of farmers out there and producers out there that do not have access to a computer to be able to bid online. And so you might want to keep that in mind as you are picking and choosing who you want to have your farm or equipment auction. And we at Pifer Auction and Realty believe that the online auction process is the best process and produces the best results, and that we're going to continue to pursue the live auction industry and use the technology to our advantage and continue to do online auctions, provide that service to the other 69% that is out there, and also in the simulcast bidding as well. But just keep in mind as you're moving forward and you're preparing for your spring auctions and for your land auctions that not everybody has a computer and not everybody can bid here in the United States. The numbers are getting better and better. We're coming to the end of our first segment, and we're waiting for Congressman Dusty Johnson to join us for a complete listing of all of the auctions that we have at Pifer Auction Realty and Land Management. You'll want to go to our website at pifers.com. That's PIFERS.com, or call us 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Pifer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Hey folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're broadcasting from the radio station this morning. You can find us at legacyofagriculture.com, Apple or Spotify, and also now on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is the Legacy of Agriculture. And today, for two segments, I've got Congressman Dusty Johnson on. Dusty, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We absolutely love agriculture, as you know, and so it's great when we get to have such a great guest on our show talking about agriculture and the enthusiasm behind agriculture.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is. People talk about it as a big part of South Dakota life, and of course that's true. But it's also a big part of America life, America's economy. It's one of the few areas where in any given year we've got a pretty big trade surplus because, as you know, Chris, the world is hungry for American corn, beans, beef, milk. I mean, we do a lot of things well.
If you're related anywhere to production agriculture, you'll always have a job because we all have to eat every day, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's exciting to talk about South Dakota agriculture in particular because South Dakota ranks number 5 in acres, production acres in the nation. I think we got just over 895 million acres in the United States, and South Dakota is just over 43 million acres, right behind Nebraska. And it's easy to talk about. We love Nebraska. They're our neighbors to the south, but also Nebraska is ranked number 4th. So we've got two states that are contiguous with each other. That's number 4 and number 5 in ranking in acres. So Dusty, tell me a little bit about your experience and your history in agriculture and what you're doing in Congress with agriculture. I'm going to give you the microphone.
Yeah, well, that seems awfully dangerous to do to a politician.
That's true.
It is, of course, hugely important to the American economy, but there aren't that many members who really understand production agriculture in the House. The House is a very urban body. Of course, the Senate, every state gets 2. Now, that means that almost every single United States senator has lots of agriculture in their state. Yes, of course, New York City is a big deal for the New York senators, but they've also got a tremendous number of dairy cattle and acres planted in upstate New York. And so that means people like Chuck Schumer generally know a little bit more about agriculture than the House members in New York City. And so the House is a far more urban body. There are only 29 House members out of 435 whose population is more rural than it is urban. And so that just means clearly if I'm going to come to the U.S. House and represent something, understand the importance of production ag and tell that story to my colleagues who are representing Denver and Omaha and Oklahoma City and L.A. and New York.
Well, it's certainly a challenge because as history has proven, 100 years ago, it took 89% of the population in the United States to grow enough food for the United States population, and now it's right at 2%. And so the amount of people by population in the United States that touches agriculture is dwindling and dwindling fast.
Yeah, and so many of the labor-intensive crops are not what you find on the prairie. Yes, fruits and vegetables are still incredibly labor intensive. When it actually comes to harvest, it's amazing what one guy or gal can do in corn, in beans, in wheat, alfalfa. It's just, one smart, well-capitalized operation can do a ton of work out there on the prairie. And so our workforce needs related to ag are so often in ag processing. I mean, how do you turn the corn into biofuels? How do you turn the milk into cheese? Those do demand a fair amount of labor still.
Absolutely. And here in South Dakota, with over 43 million acres, there's 29,000 producers, and therefore the average farm size out in South Dakota is just short of 1,500 acres per producer. That's a lot of acres for one producer.
Well, and I think that it's always hard to know what is a farmer. I mean, for instance, when you look at national data, they call a lot of people farmers, and they call a lot of things farms, which I don't actually think are farms.
Agreed.
Somebody who's got 1 acre of tomatoes, listen, that's great. I mean, that's incredible food, and I think that's a worthwhile side hustle for them. But that is not what most of us think of as farms, and there's a little bit of that noise in the data for South Dakota as well. My father-in-law has some acres, mostly that he rents out, but you wouldn't want to call the guy a farmer. He's a financial advisor. And so similarly, I think when you look at actual full-time farmers, people who are making a preponderance of their income coming into their family off the farm, I would imagine their operations are quite a bit bigger than 1,500 acres, actually.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. So tell us about the farm bill that you've been working on.
Yeah, so I'm one of the subcommittee chairmen that really gets their hands dirty in drafting these farm bills. Right now we're in a situation where the last farm bill, pretty good farm bill, because you had some knuckleheads decide to kick the Speaker of the House out of office. That really set us back. That was the 2 months we really needed to be able to finish the farm bill this last year. So in the end, we took the 5-year farm bill, we made it a 6-year farm bill. So we're still operating this year under the same farm bill we've had for 5 years. The good news for producers is they understand those programs today. They're the same programs they've been operating under. We are hopeful that we're going to get a farm bill done this year. Now, to be honest, they're not going to be huge changes to that farm bill. I think we do have a sense that a lot of things are working pretty well. I'd like to do some of the things that we do well even a little better. You look at things like forestry. We've got categorical exclusions that mean you don't have to go through the entire NEPA process, the entire environmental process, to be able to go out and harvest a particular area for timber. We could do even more of that. Similarly, I think the rural broadband programs that are in the farm bill, I think we could do an even better job of deploying rural broadband. Crop insurance works well. You look at the Title I programs, those work well. But again, I think we could increase reference prices to make it a little bit more likely that those programs trigger when people are actually in a kind of a difficult spot.
So what do you think are the greatest advantages in the farm bill that you're introducing to the producer?
I mean, it's hard to overstate the importance of crop insurance, to a modern producer. I think on the livestock side, most of those risk management programs aren't anywhere near as comprehensive as you get on the row crop side. And to be honest with you, cattle country is divided about exactly what those programs should look like. Some of them don't want a lot more government intervention, but almost all of us agree the marketplace could probably be healthier if we had more capacity outside of the big four packers. I've been a real leader in this area. I've introduced the Butcher Block Act. I've introduced the Cattle Contract Library. We put both of those things into effect, either administratively or by passing them as part of larger programs. And those collectively try to balance the playing field so that the packers don't have quite so much of an asymmetrical advantage over the independent cow-calf producers.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right, Dusty. So, for those of us that are out here in the central or the upper Midwest, we see so much on the news. We see so much that's going on in the world right now. We see what's going on down in the border. As just somebody in the rural portion of the United States, what can we do to help agriculture? What can we do to help those congressmen and the leaders of our country do a better job?
Related to the border, you mean?
Well, related to agriculture, what can we do to help?
Well, I mean, I think strong voices are always valuable. I mean, it's a little bit difficult because the people who don't understand production agriculture probably are the ones least likely that people can, get a meeting in the office or go see them at the state fair. I mean, you don't need to convince John Thune, Mike Rounds, Dusty Johnson, Chuck Grassley, Joni Ernst, Ricketts, Fisher. I mean, these are not people that you need to convince about the importance of agriculture. I mean, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez probably doesn't understand it as much as she should, but it's a little bit hard for these more urban members probably to get connected to everyday South Dakotans who understand what it means to go out and feed the world.
This is Jasmine with Pfeiffer's Auction and Realty. We have a great lineup of machinery and farm sales this spring. Many of them already have listings available on our website. If you're looking to buy land or machinery, go to www.pfers.com to see a complete catalog of our auctions. It's updated daily, so make sure to check back in with us and find the perfect lot for you. When it comes to auctions, nobody does it better.
What do you see as the future of agriculture in the Midwest, particularly South Dakota?
Well, I think the future is already here, to the extent that you have operations that have gotten a lot more sophisticated in the last 10 years. They are way better at understanding their risk management strategies. They are better at hedging. They are better at marketing. They understand the value of outside markets. I mean, 60% of South Dakota soybeans go overseas. I mean, we're never going to be in a position where South Dakota, we're going to eat as many soybeans as we grow. We need that market access. You also have increasingly technology being deployed. Not to be, too cliche, but I feel like the future of agriculture is already here. And if you talk to any, particularly on the farm side, if you talk to any producer, they're going to be able to tell you that they're using technology to a degree they simply were not 10 years ago.
The one of the statistics that the USDA puts out, Dusty, that's really interesting to me, and I'm proud of being in South Dakota, that there's over $1 billion worth of milk that South Dakota produces and puts into the local economy. I had a meeting this morning with an extremely large agricultural banking organization that they said that they have one client that's added, I don't know, 50. I think it was between 15 to 20,000 head of cows, dairy cows, to their herds. And so agriculture in South Dakota is just exploding in growth, especially as states like Iowa become more and more populated. People are wanting to come to South Dakota, not only because of being a non-income tax state, but because of the quality of life.
Well, and I don't think I've seen that much leakage from Iowa, but, man alive, have we seen it from California? I mean, California is the top ag producing state in the country, but I think they are almost adversarial to production agriculture in that state. And we have quite a number of dairymen in our state who are refugees from California. Some of my colleagues from California here in the U.S. House are farmers. John Duarte would be one. David Valadeo would be a dairyman. He'd be another. They're not the only ones, though. And I think John Duarte would tell you as a farmer that he feels under siege from regulators in California. So I think we're going to continue to see people who love growing things, love raising things, love feeding the world, look to South Dakota as an oasis of frankly, freedom and allowing smart people to do smart things.
It's interesting. We talk about the history of agriculture, Dusty. I was raised on a potato farm in Idaho, and I've been out here in the Midwest in agriculture for well over 20 years. And growing up in Idaho in the higher elevations, a lot of the premium quality hay 30 and 40 years ago was shipped out of Idaho down into California to feed agriculture in California. And as California grew and the population exploded, those dairies, and because of the rising real estate values and EPA regulations, and the list goes on, those massive, huge dairies moved to Idaho. They moved, kind of seemed like they went over the top of Utah and are settling even on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and Nebraska.
Yeah, at some point, people are going to go where they feel like they can have a future, where there's opportunity, where they can be good stewards of the land and also good stewards of their own finances. Some of them, of course, they want to differentiate their products. We've seen on the cattle side just an almost impossible to believe increase in the quality of beef, because people are willing to invest in genetics, and they're willing to invest in better stewardship of those herds. And you've got people who want to be able to make those kind of investments and not be castigated for it, but be rewarded.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What other things do you see going on in the House and Senate that greatly affect the good people here in the upper Midwest in agriculture, the good things?
Well, I think that there is a better understanding now of the importance of the supply chain and how we move food from the farm to the table. I think there's a better understanding even among the urbanites that food doesn't come from a grocery store, right? I've had to be Mr. Supply Chain in Congress, and we passed a number of really comprehensive and important bills to try to help those supply chains, whereby we get that food to market. I think COVID, with as terrible as it was, did create more of an environment for us to be able to respect the American farmer, the American rancher, and all of the hardworking men and women who help us get that food to the table.
Well, that's an interesting statement that you make, Congressman, in the fact that when COVID hit, the urbanites, they were able to go home, put a mask on, go home, and stay home. But I don't know of one rancher, one farmer that locked his front door. He had to go out, he had to feed cattle, and he had to grow crops so that people could keep eating. I think there's getting to be less and less people that understand that concept, but also the concept that that when you're feeding a dairy cow, or whether you're feeding a hog or a beef cow, you have to have the area to do that in, but it takes a tremendous amount of acres. Say for a 10,000 head dairy, it takes hundreds and hundreds of acres just to produce enough feed for that herd, just for one herd.
Oh yeah, agriculture is a capital intensive and a land intensive business. I think as we've got a world that's increasingly hungry, particularly a world that's increasingly hungry for protein, America is going to be even more demand in the future. The good news is we got a real big country, and lots of open acres, and lots of people willing to invest in technology. I mean, the same ground in South Dakota where Grandpa maybe got 40 bushel corn, you're now getting 200 bushel corn. That is a pretty remarkable improvement in yields over the course of a generation or two.
Well, I think according to the USDA reports, in some of our production agriculture, both in corn and beans, I think from the year 2021 to 22, just in 1 year, there was a 7% increase in production. And we have to have those numbers in order to feed the world. And we have to have those numbers in order to support the herds and the animals that there are to produce agriculture.
Well, any given year, of course, yields are going to be driven a lot more by, how wet. I mean, prevent plant can wipe you from 200 acres down to 0 acres, or drought can certainly take 30% or more off a yield. So, I mean, in any given year, of course, weather is going to drive those numbers. But over time, you're exactly right. We want to continue to see the growth. And of course, corn's been leading a lot of that yield growth. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that plateaus a little bit, but we're going to need other commodities to step up. The tremendous research is being done at most every land grant university. I think the best days are yet to come.
I would agree with you. Absolutely, Dusty. Well, I know that you're on a super busy schedule, and we've been talking here for about 20 minutes or so. I just want you to know we think you're doing a great job, and we appreciate you for joining us on the Legacy of Agriculture. And let's get together and have dinner sometime.
Well, there you go. It's certainly an honor to make sure that I'm a strong voice for production ag. And I would just note, as a closing shot, you don't need to, I think our team really works hard on this, Chris. About a year ago, the University of Virginia analyzed every congressional office, and they tried to figure out who did the best in particular issues. And out of all the Republicans in the United States House, they said our team did the very best in actually being effective when it comes to agricultural policy, and we're going to keep doing it.
You're a good man. We appreciate your help and support, and keep working for us.
Sounds good. Thanks much.
Thank you, sir.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pfeiffer's Auction and Realty. Pfeiffer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back to our fourth and final segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair. I appreciate you joining, and I appreciate Dusty Johnson for joining us in segment number 2 and segment number 3. He's a very, very busy man, and you can see that he's a house of fire, and he's got a lot going on. So the time that we had with Congressman Johnson was very, very short. And I wish that we could have really delved into more of the history of agriculture, but we'll take what we can get with Congressman Johnson. He did a fabulous job. In segment 1, I talked about some statistics and how South Dakota ranks nationally in production on certain crops and beef production. And we talked quite a bit about dairy production. Congressman Johnson talked about the dairy industry and what's happening in the dairy industry. In 1 year alone, the cattle population, the milk cow population increased in 1 year by 21,000 head. That's a huge industry, and that's a huge increase in milk production in the state of South Dakota. And we're very proud of those numbers. And that means that people have a lot of confidence in South Dakota agriculture. They have a lot of confidence in agriculture in the Midwest, and it will obviously continue to be our backbone. And we definitely thank our producers and those people that are out in the agricultural world that are making all of this happen. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of focus, and it takes a lot of concentration to be able to do this. And oftentimes I'm not a fan, and this show will never be a political show. I don't want it to be about politics, but I will say this: I'm a huge fan of anybody in politics that supports and pushes agriculture and allows agriculture to become better and bigger and stronger here in the United States. As I read through and I talk about a lot of the statistics, and I see a lot of the statistics about agriculture, obviously God is not making more ground. More dirt will never be made. But what we're seeing with producers and those of us that are in agriculture is the technology and everything that is we're becoming more efficient in agriculture. We're able, through plant genetics, through seed genetics, through technology, we're making our farm ground more productive and more valuable. Just this morning, I had a great conversation with a gentleman that is thinking about selling some farmland, and of course, the first thing they asked me is what's farmland doing? And so I went out and I did some more research through the USDA, and I can tell you what the USDA is telling us about real estate values, cropland values, cash rents, and cash rents paid to landlords. So I'm going to share this 2023 farm value, estate value, and cash rent report. Again, this was put out by the USDA on August 24th of 2023. And this is what they say. This was a report that came out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It says South Dakota's farm real estate value, a measurement of the value of all land and buildings on farms, increased from 2022, according to the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. Farm real estate value for 2023 averaged $2,920 per acre, up $320 per acre, which is 12% from last year. So from 2022 to 2023, the overall farmland value increased by 12%. in just 1 year. That's incredible appreciation. Cropland value increased 13% from last year to $4,450 per acre. Dryland cropland value averaged $4,520 per acre. That's $520 higher than last year. And pasture land at $1,340 per acre was $110 higher than the previous year. 13% increase just on cropland value over a 12-month period of time. So the next big question, especially to our land managers, is what's cash rent paid to landlords? Has that increased in 2023? So here's your answer. In 2023, for cropland increases from last year, irrigated cropland rent averaged $219 per acre. That's $14 above last year. Dryland cropland rent averaged $126 per acre, which is $1 higher than the year previous. And pasture land rented for a cash average of $30 per acre, 50 cents above the previous year. So it goes on to say, and just so that you know, if you want to go out and read and gather this information for yourself, the county level averages for 2023 cash rent paid to landlords was released on August 25th of 2023 and will be available through the NASS Quick Stats located at quickStats.nass.usda.gov. And so you can go to the USDA.gov website and look up what cash rents are, land value rents are for 2023, and follow those statistics. It's very, very good information for those of us that are in the agricultural industry and trying to make a difference in agriculture. As you might know from listening to our podcast, we're always interested in helping agriculture and helping especially the young people that are getting into agriculture have access to this information and in their crop making decisions. You know, it was very interesting. A week ago, we had Scott Bachmeyer on, and I want to refresh your memory. If you want to go back and listen to on Apple or on Spotify, that Scott Bachmeyer related a story that years ago when he got out of college, he graduated with a degree in broadcasting, but he wanted to go back to the farm and farm. And when he went back to the farm to the ranch, I should say to ranch, he said that he could buy a ranch for $96 an acre. And when he sat down with his banker and he sat down with his dad, they couldn't make $96 an acre pencil out. And this wasn't too many years ago. Scott's not old like the rest of us are. Scott's a young man, and it wasn't very many years ago that was the case. However, now that same pasture ground and ranch land is trading for over $4,000 an acre. So go back and listen to that podcast. Hey, folks, we're coming to the end of our fourth and final segment this week. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to give a huge shout out to Piper Auction Realty for joining us. Those of you that can't hear it on the radio or don't have access to your radio, or you want to go back and listen to previous podcasts, you can do that on Apple and Spotify. Also, an exciting announcement that we made a couple of weeks ago is that we're now on YouTube. Go to legacyofagriculture.com. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple, and we're on Spotify. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we're going to be right back next week with another great show of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair. Thank you for joining us.
$500,000 bid.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Piper's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Piper's at 605-836-2277.